Thank you. Hi, good morning. Thank you everyone for coming. It is my great honor to introduce Maya Spaur here today for her final dissertation and her defense here in the Department of Environmental Health Sciences. And it's been an amazing but short 4 years for Maya here, and what she's accomplished in 4 years is amazing. So Maya first came to us in the fall of 2019, which is only 4 years ago. And so that's phenomenal. And if you remember the fall of 2019, right, that was right before the COVID pandemic. And so Maya's dissertation work, you know, considering the difficulties and the challenges of moving everything remote for almost 2 full years, it's even more impressive what she's been able to accomplish despite all of the difficulties that we all face. So before coming here, Maya already had a very impressive record of environmental health sciences research, all really focused around water and health. So in 2017, Maya completed her BS from the University of Maryland in environmental engineering and science.
Environmental science and technology.
Environmental science and technology, thank you. And she also has a BA in government and politics as well. And after graduating from the University of Maryland, she went to the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, where she got a Master's of Science in Environmental Health and Engineering, and focused on risk assessment there. And she worked under the mentorship of Dr. Keith Nachman there, where she studied quantitative inputs for microbial risk assessment. So again, focusing on water. And after finishing her master's, she then spent the summer with Dr. Mary Ward at NCI, the National Cancer Institute, where she focused on estimating drinking water exposures for the Ag Health study, and specifically characterizing exposure misclassification issues with the Ag Health study. And so all of that really, you know, prepared Maya really well to do the work that she's going to present to you today. And I know sometimes when we see dissertation, you know, defense presentations, it's hard to really understand how difficult and how time consuming and how challenging this work can be. And so I want to take this moment to just acknowledge how much effort and how much brilliant thinking Maya put into this work. She worked so hard to get access to restricted data sets, to develop new code and new methods for estimating water exposures at different, you know, novel spatial resolutions, and she's really pushing the field forward in this way. And so many projects now are coming out of her expertise, and she's contributed so much to this field. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Maya.
Thanks, Annie, for the introduction. It's great to have you all here. Thanks so much for coming. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So thanks so much. I'm Maya Spaur. I'm a PhD candidate in this department. My advisors are Dr. Vanny Nigra and Dr. Anna Navasasian. I've been very lucky to have such wonderful advisors and mentors. And I'm really excited to present to you my dissertation research studying drinking water arsenic and uranium exposures and their associations with urinary biomarkers and diabetes in the United States. Diabetes is an incredibly important disease to public health. In the United States, approximately 37 million people have diabetes, and that's around 11% of the population. However, roughly 20% or 1 in 5 of the people with diabetes don't have a formal diagnosis. This may be because it's not presenting symptomatically, or they may lack access to healthcare. And there's an increasing burden of disease and prevalence in diabetes around the United States and around the world. As well, there are significant financial costs and serious health complications that may arise from diabetes. We propose an underlying mechanism for type 2 diabetes that considers both genetic risk factors and comorbidities, as well as environmental exposures, such as from metals and metalloids, as well as adiposity. Environmental exposures to metals and metalloids may lead to insulin resistance, and chronically this may lead to pancreatic beta cell dysfunction and failure from overwork. Ultimately, this can lead to decreased insulin secretion as well as type 2 diabetes, and this is characterized by hyperglycemia or high blood sugar. There are a variety of health effects that are associated with long-term elevated exposures to inorganic arsenic in drinking water. These include cardiovascular disease, as well as cancer of the bladder, kidney, lung, prostate, and skin. Substantial evidence also links high levels of inorganic arsenic exposure in drinking water to diabetes risk. However, the evidence is inconsistent at low to moderate levels of drinking water exposures. Previous studies have also used levels of arsenic in urine as a biomarker of total exposure and drinking water exposure and their corresponding associations with diabetes risk. However, these studies are limited by the potential for reverse causality. And what I mean by that is that even at subclinical stages of diabetes progression, sometimes even before an initial diagnosis, diabetes can affect the levels of metals that are excreted in urine. So this can then affect the levels of the biomarker that we're using to estimate drinking water exposure. So by using levels of arsenic as well as uranium in drinking water directly, we can evaluate the association between drinking water exposures and diabetes risk without this potential bias. There are also adverse health effects associated to elevated levels of uranium exposure, specifically cancer and nephrotoxicity. However, much of this evidence is in occupational settings with high exposure. There's less evidence available in general populations. Through uranium's known role in causing kidney damage, we hypothesize that uranium may also have an effect on diabetes. Chronic kidney disease is known to be associated with diabetes as well as hypertension, so we hypothesize that uranium will operate by a similar mechanism as arsenic in increasing diabetes risk. Sources of arsenic and uranium exposure to the general population includes drinking water and diet. In drinking water, arsenic and uranium can occur in federally unregulated private wells and in regulated public water supplies. In diet, inorganic arsenic can come from rice. Organic arsenic, which is largely considered a non-toxic form, primarily comes from seafood, and uranium can come from meat, root vegetables, and other dietary sources. However, dietary sources of uranium are less well understood. Urinary biomarkers integrate both drinking water and dietary sources of arsenic and uranium exposure. In the United States, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency regulates both arsenic and uranium in public water supplies. And for this dissertation, we're focusing on community water systems. They're defined as public water supplies that serve the same population and at least 25 people year-round. In 2001, the final arsenic rule was passed, and it reduced the maximum contaminant level for arsenic from 50 to 10 micrograms per liter. The maximum contaminant level is a federally enforceable standard that considers both risk to health as well as technological and financial constraints. The final arsenic rule became effective in 2006, and there was a monitoring period for compliance with the rule from 2006 to 2008, and again from 2009 to 2011. Arsenic continues to be monitored in federal water systems. However, we don't have more recent data available yet. The final radionuclide rule was passed in 2000, and this created a maximum contaminant level of uranium at 30 micrograms per liter. This became effective in 2003, and the first initial monitoring period for uranium occurred from 2001 to 2007, with a later monitoring period from 2008 to 2011. There's a critical need to evaluate the effectiveness of these maximum contaminant levels for reducing exposures, particularly among those who are most highly exposed. And I will note that the actual maximum contaminant level goal, which is a non-enforceable standard but based only on risk to health, is actually 0 micrograms per liter for both contaminants, and this reflects that there's no known safe level of exposure. Other states and countries have also passed more health protective guidelines. New Jersey and New Hampshire both have a maximum contaminant level of 5 micrograms per liter, and this is in consideration that long-term exposure to levels of arsenic, even below the maximum contaminant level, are known to be associated with adverse health effects. The Netherlands has a maximum contaminant level of 1 microgram per liter, and while I'm not aware of any more protective health standard for uranium that exists today, the World Health Organization used to have a guidance for uranium of 2 micrograms per liter in regards to its health effects for nephrotoxicity. Now, we hypothesize that while public water systems are regulated and they're largely considered to be safe, but if water arsenic and uranium exposures at levels even below the maximum contaminant level are major sources of overall exposure, then water interventions can effectively reduce overall exposure to these known toxicants. And again, just keeping in mind, we have regulations for these contaminants, but there are more health protective goals. The first part of my objectives are to study associations between unregulated private wells and regulated community water systems across the United States in order to understand where groundwater sources supplying both regulated and unregulated sources and the reflected final exposure levels may be similar across the country. Our second objective was to evaluate drinking water arsenic and uranium exposures and their associations with urinary biomarkers. Urinary biomarkers are measures of internal dose, and this can also help us understand whether our estimates of arsenic and uranium in drinking water are valid to general populations. And finally, I evaluated the associations between drinking water arsenic and uranium exposures with diabetes risk across multiple studies. And overall, these are my 3 objectives that I'll be discussing. So diving into the first part, our objective was to evaluate the nationwide association between private wells and community water system arsenic concentrations across the United States, as well as by different geographic region, socio-demographic county cluster, and to really understand whether this association changes over time, keeping in mind the implementation of the new maximum contaminant level. To really dive into the exposures that we're looking at, our data for private well water arsenic represent time invariant 90th percentile probabilities of private well water arsenic exceeding 10 micrograms per liter. We're relying on probabilities here because private wells are not federally regulated or monitored across the United States. So we have to rely on these models that were developed by our collaborators at US Geological Survey based on data from 1970 to 2013. So these are long-term averages. For community water system arsenic, we use community water system arsenic concentrations collected from 2006 to 2011. These are population-weighted averages generated for community water systems across the country, and these are from the US EPA Contaminants Occurrence Database. You'll note some states are missing data, and it's because it relies on states voluntarily providing this data to the US EPA. What did we find? So we found that the association between private wells and community water systems did decrease over time. To walk you through this graph, on the x-axis we have the probability of private well water arsenic exceeding 10. Again, that's the maximum contaminant level for community water systems. And on the y-axis we have community water system arsenic concentration. From 2006 to 2008, for 100% increase in the probability of private well water arsenic exceeding 10, community water system arsenic increased by 8.4 micrograms per liter. From 2009 to 2011, the corresponding slope was 7.3. And when we took a mean difference between these 2 slopes, we saw that there was a 1.1 microgram per liter decrease in the association between community water system arsenic and private well water arsenic, comparing the early to the later monitoring period. As this difference was statistically significant, we know that there was a stronger association between private wells and community water systems in the early monitoring period. We also evaluated the association between the probability of private well water arsenic and natural log transformed community water system arsenic concentrations using smooth Lewis models. And so as you can see, at different probabilities of private well water arsenic, we do see a change in natural log transformed community water system arsenic. Particularly at high levels of probability, we can see these curves really start to separate from the early to later monitoring period. And this reflects the maximum contaminant level implementation, specifically in counties where community water system arsenic concentrations were higher, is really driving this difference between private wells and community water system arsenic. We observed a number of important differences by geographic region. So in this slide, I'm showing the association between private well water arsenic and community water system arsenic concentrations from 2006 to 2011. As you can see, the strongest associations were in the central Midwest and in the Southwest, and this will be relevant later. And we saw negligible associations in the Mid-Atlantic and in New England. And this really does reinforce information that we have that drinking water sources for many areas in the Mid-Atlantic and in the Northeast are different between private wells and community water systems. We also saw a number of important differences by socio-demographic cluster. Specifically, the highest associations were in rural American Indian, rural and low socioeconomic status, and semi-urban Hispanic counties. So we are seeing these clear evidence of differential exposures by socio-demographic county cluster. I will note, while we have a very steep slope for rural American Indian counties, the probabilities do end around a bit below about 25%, despite that steep slope. So this indicates that there is a need for more data, particularly that's relevant to rural American Indian communities. In conclusion, private well water arsenic was positively associated with community water system arsenic concentrations nationwide. Previous studies had really evaluated this association at a regional level, so we expanded it to look at this nationally. This association did decrease over time, reflecting implementation of the final arsenic rule, particularly in counties that had higher community water system arsenic concentrations, but it also really drives the difference between community water systems and unregulated private well users. So unregulated private well users would remain exposed. We saw a number of important differences by region and sociodemographic characteristics. But high exposures do continue to persist in many areas, and this highlights the need for future research, regulatory action, and support. Diving into the second part, my objectives were to evaluate the association between drinking water arsenic and uranium exposures with urinary biomarkers in 3 different study populations representing general U.S. population. So a brief overview of the study characteristics, and by using different study populations, we can really characterize different portions of the U.S. population to evaluate differences and really highlight communities that are vulnerable. The National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey is a cross-sectional survey that's representative of the general and non-institutionalized U.S. population. We used data from 2003 to 2014. We used urinary biomarker data for dimethyl arsenate and total arsenic, and I'll describe this on the next slide. We used our water assignment at the county level. I will note that for NHANES, we used both public data and restricted geographic data. So for NHANES, all geographic data is considered restricted. So all of our approvals, all of our methods and policies really have to undergo approval by the National Center for Health Statistics. The water arsenic data that we generated at the county level was then merged participants by their county of residence, and all of my analyses I had to conduct at the Research Data Center at Bruce College to really ensure that we could protect participant confidentiality using this restricted data. The Strong Heart Family Study is a prospective cohort of cardiovascular disease and its risk factors among American Indian adults in Arizona, Oklahoma, North Dakota, and South Dakota. We used biomarker data collected from 2001 to 2003, and we had data for inorganic arsenic, methylated species, as well as uranium. We assigned the water arsenic and uranium exposures at the zip code level based on the participant zip code. This is the finest level of geographic resolution we had was the zip code. Multi-ethnic study of atherosclerosis is a prospective cohort, also of cardiovascular disease and its risk factors, among a community-based sample of racially and ethnically diverse urban U.S. adults across the country in 6 different metropolitan centers. We had biomarker data from 2000 to 2002 and from 2010 to 2011. And I will note that this data was just recently finished being analyzed by the Meta Lab, so it's been very exciting to be able to analyze this data. We had urine biomarker data for inorganic arsenic, methylated species, as well as uranium. And we also assigned the water arsenic data at the zip code level. And I forgot to mention, but for the Strong Heart Family Study, I additionally merged this data at the University of Oklahoma, again, to really ensure that we could protect the confidentiality of participants and where they live. And you'll note that these 1 studies of the general population, 1 studies of American Indian communities, and 1 is of racially and ethnically urban U.S. adults. So we can really capture many different parts of the general U.S. population. For our water arsenic data, I previously described this. For NHANES, again, we use this data at the county level. But for the Strong Heart Family Study and MESA, we use this at the zip code level, which I'll describe soon. For water uranium, for private well water uranium, we used average groundwater uranium concentrations sampled by the National Uranium Resource Evaluation Program from 1975 to 1980. This was collected in various water sources across the United States. This is older data, so there are limitations with this data set. However, it was the best data that we had publicly available. For community water system uranium, we used data from 2000 to 2011, also from the U.S. EPA Contaminants Occurrence Database, and previously published by members of our team. For urinary inorganic arsenic, as I previously described, inorganic arsenic exposure can come from water, as well as rice, grains, and other foods. This undergoes oxidative methylation to inorganic arsenic. This undergoes oxidative methylation to monomethyl arsenate, which is further methylated to dimethyl arsenate. And this is reflected in total urinary arsenic, in addition to metabolites such as arsenose sugars, arsenolipids, and arbutin from recent seafood intake. And so for NHANES, we had data for DMA and total urinary arsenic. As this data really had high proportion of the data above the limits of detection, there wasn't sufficient amounts of data for inorganic arsenic and MMA above the limits of detection. So that's why for NHANES, we just used DMA and total urine arsenic. We used a previously published and validated method to remove the contribution of diet and tobacco sources to the urinary arsenic biomarkers, so that it mainly is a reflection of exposure from drinking water. And for the Strong Heart Family Study and in MESA, this data was really robust. We had a really high proportion of data about the lowest detection. So we could use inorganic arsenic, MMA, DMA, the sum of inorganic and methylated species, as well as total urinary uranium. One of the challenges and the really exciting parts of my thesis was getting to do the exposure assignment of participants to their drinking water exposures. So we assigned participants in both the Strong Heart Family Study and in MESA to zip code level public water estimates. But how did we get there? So this is a map of Oklahoma. The black lines represent zip code tabulation areas, and the polygons of different colors represent community water system distribution boundaries. The states of Arizona, Oklahoma, California, Illinois, Minnesota, and North Carolina all publish shape files of the community water system distribution boundaries online. So I overlap these community water system distribution boundaries with 2010 census zip code tabulation areas. And in these areas of overlap, I created population weights to create a population weighted average of arsenic and uranium concentrations for each zip code. I also created an area weighted average, but for this part, I'll really just be focusing on the population weighted average. For the states of North Dakota, South Dakota, Maryland, and New York, these states don't publish shape files online, so I manually assign these estimates to participants based on residential town name. And for the Strong Heart Family Study, I jittered these estimates by 20%. This was in order to comply with the confidentiality procedures, and jittering is a validated method to really mask resident locations. For the Strong Heart Family Study, I additionally assigned participants to private well data, as these participants may be served by private wells or community water systems. Again, MESA is an urban study, so private wells would not be relevant. For the private well arsenic probabilities, they were previously generated for kilometer square grids, and these were grouped to the code level. For the private well water uranium, we had data for the sample coordinates. As you can see, this is a map really zooming in on where these coordinates are located. We grouped them to the zip code tabulation areas and created averages. And again, for the Strong Heart Family Study, these estimates were jittered at 20%. Diving into the results, this slide shows the water exposure distributions for all the different studies. For NHANES, we could only output results in terms of means or geometric mean ratios, so I can't show any percentiles for NHANES. In NHANES, the mean community water system arsenic concentration was 1.35, and the mean private well water arsenic probability of exceeding 10 micrograms per liter was 12%. For the Strong Heart Family Study and MESA, as you can see, we generally had higher community water system arsenic concentrations in the Strong Heart Family Study, and the mean private well arsenic probability was 9%. But there was considerable variability in private well water arsenic probability across the Strong Heart Family Study. For uranium, for community water system uranium, the average concentration was generally similar across the Strong Heart Family Study and in MESA. However, in MESA, we did not have data for Maryland and many of the Chicago, Illinois participants. And much of these higher exposures were really due to California and also North Carolina. As you can see, for private well water uranium, we also had considerable variability, but I will note there was no data for areas where the North Dakota participants lived for private well uranium. We found that water arsenic exposures were positively associated with urinary arsenic biomarkers in NHANES. On this slide, I'm showing the adjusted percent change in urinary recalibrated DMA, comparing the highest to the lowest tertile of community water system arsenic concentration. So as you can see, over all participants, there was a 25% increase in urinary DMA, comparing the highest to the lowest tertile of community water system arsenic. Again, the community water system arsenic is regulated, and the mean concentration was far below the maximum attainment level. When we stratified by race ethnicity, our results were relatively consistent across racial ethnic group. And when we stratified by census region, and census region was the finest level of geographic resolution I could present my data, we saw the strongest associations in the South and in the West, so these clear differences by region. We saw similar results, very similar results when we look at the highest to the lowest tertile of private well water arsenic probability. We didn't expect to see such similar findings, but we did. Overall, there was a 20% increase in urinary DMA, comparing the highest to the lowest tertile of private well water arsenic. We saw generally similar findings by race ethnicity group. However, we did see a much higher association among Mexican American participants. Among Mexican American participants, there was a 25% increase in urinary DMA. And when we stratified by census region, we did see a positive association in the Northeast, the South, and the West. While this wasn't statistically significant in the Northeast, this does reflect information that we know, that particularly in the Northeast, private wells may be drawing water supplies from groundwater that may have higher arsenic concentrations than community water systems in this area. When we look at our results from the Strong Heart Family Study and in Mesa, and on this slide, I'm showing the percent change in urinary inorganic arsenic per twofold increase in water arsenic. And I'm just focusing on inorganic arsenic here, but we did have very similar findings, slightly attenuated for the urinary sum of inorganic and methylated species. So in the Strong Heart Family Study, there was a 26% increase in urinary inorganic arsenic per twofold increase in community water system arsenic. In Mesa, this was a 13% increase. And in a meta-analysis where we pulled these effect estimates for community water system arsenic concentration, we saw a 19% increase in urinary inorganic arsenic per doubling in community water system arsenic concentration. For private wells, we saw a similar finding with 12% increase per doubling in private well water arsenic probability. For uranium, as you can see, there's much more heterogeneity across studies. In the Strong Heart Family Study, for twofold increase in community water system uranium, there was an 18% increase in urinary uranium. In Mesa, this was a 53% increase. Again, Mesa exposures were below the maximum contaminant level, but we do see this very strong association, largely driven by participants in California. In a meta-analysis, there was a 35% increase in urinary DMA per doubling in community water system uranium. We also evaluated this association using categories of water arsenic concentration below current regulatory thresholds. So in this slide, I'm showing the adjusted geometric mean ratio in urinary inorganic arsenic and the sum. So in the Strong Heart Family Study, compared to less than or equal to 1 microgram per liter, we saw significantly higher urinary inorganic arsenic and the urinary sum of arsenic above 1 through 5 and above 5 micrograms per liter. And in Mesa, comparing less than or equal to 1 versus greater than 1 microgram per liter of community water arsenic, again, we saw significantly higher inorganic arsenic and some arsenic in urine. So at levels far below the current maximum contaminant level, we're seeing these significant increases in measures of intravenous dose. Similarly, when we evaluated categories of community water system uranium at levels below the current regulatory thresholds, in the Strong Heart Family Study, compared to less than or equal to 1, above 1 through 10 and above 10 micrograms per liter, saw significantly higher urinary uranium concentrations, and similarly for Mesa as well, above 1 through 5 and above 5 micrograms per liter, we saw the significant increase in urinary uranium. Finally, we found that water arsenic and uranium exposures do contribute to total internal dose. This slide uses the conditional R squared from our linear effects models, and this uses the urinary biomarkers in terms of micrograms creatinine to account for urine dilution in our biomarker measure. So in the Strong Heart Family Study, private well and community water system arsenic can explain up to 46% of the variability in urinary sum of arsenic, with an additional 6 to 7% of the variability explained by additional factors such as age, sex, body mass index, smoking, and diet. In Mesa, 54% of the variability in urinary sum of arsenic can be explained by community water system arsenic concentration, with only an additional 7% of the variability explained by additional factors. For uranium, we saw in the Strong Heart Family Study that private well and community water system uranium can explain up to 22% of the variability in urinary uranium, with only 1 to 2% of additional variability be explained by additional factors. This may highlight the limitation of the data that we have. It may not be as relevant and robust in areas where Strong Heart Family Study participants live. And this may be also a reflection of other sources of uranium exposure, such as through inhalation. In Mesa, community water system uranium can explain approximately 60% of the variability in urinary uranium. So our findings suggest that water arsenic is an important contributor to total inorganic arsenic exposure. And while water uranium is an important contributor to total uranium exposures in Mesa, this trend is less clear in the Strong Heart Family Study, and it may be a reflection of limitations of the data or additional sources of exposure to both studies. In conclusion, water arsenic and uranium in private wells and community water systems are major sources of exposure across 3 different studies of general US populations. These findings do have important implications for drinking water regulations. They do highlight the need to reassess our current maximum contaminant level to consider this and other evidence suggesting that they're too high to protect against exposure and adverse health effects. And there's an important need for increased uranium monitoring data, particularly in rural American Indian communities. Finally, diving into part 3, our objective was to study associations between drinking water, arsenic, and uranium exposures with diabetes risk in the Strong Heart Family Study in MESA. I previously mentioned that there is evidence that links inorganic arsenic exposure in drinking water to diabetes. However, there are certain limitations of this work. Other studies have used high water arsenic concentrations above 100 micrograms per liter that are not relevant to most of the US population. And studies that have used urinary arsenic biomarkers to evaluate diabetes risk are limited by reverse causality. By looking at measures of arsenic and other metals in drinking water directly, we can avoid this potential reverse causality and factor pathway to really evaluate this association. And we have shown in the previous section that these drinking water measures are relevant to these populations, so we can use this to measure exposure. As a brief overview of the study design and data, we use definitions of diabetes based on the American Diabetes Association as a fasting plasma glucose greater than or equal to 126 milligrams per deciliter, the use of insulin or oral hypoglycemic medications, hemoglobin A1C at or above 6.5%, and or a self-reported prior clinical diagnosis. For MESA, we used covariate information collected at exam 1 from 2002, and we had diabetes follow-up through 2018 with a mean follow-up time of 6 years. For the Strong Heart Family Study, we used information on relevant covariates collected at baseline from 2001 to 2002. We had a mean follow-up time of 5.6 years, and the current Strong Heart Family Study exam visit is ongoing, so hopefully there will be additional follow-up data available. Some brief overviews of the study characteristics. In the Strong Heart Family Study, we had 245 cases of incident diabetes and 907 cases of incident diabetes in MESA. In terms of age, the MESA participants are on average quite a bit older than Strong Heart Family Study participants, and over half of the participants in both studies are female. When we look at body mass index, as you'd expect, participants with incident diabetes have a higher BMI than those who do not have incident diabetes. However, BMI was generally higher among Strong Heart Family Study participants compared to MESA participants. Looking at our water arsenic exposures, as we previously mentioned, water arsenic was higher in the Strong Heart Family Study than in MESA generally. And I'm not showing this, but uranium exposures, both arsenic and uranium exposures were generally similar across diabetes status in both studies. And one of the strengths of looking at these different study populations is that diabetes has the highest burden in American Indian communities in the United States, so it's very important to look at these robust data sets in this vulnerable and susceptible population. As MESA is a cohort of generally older individuals across diverse metropolitan areas, we can really look at many different populations here. We found that water arsenic exposures were positively associated with diabetes risk. So to walk you through this slide, the x-axis shows the adjusted hazard ratio per twofold increase in water arsenic concentration. In the Strong Heart Family Study, for twofold increase in private well water arsenic, we had a hazard ratio of 1.09 and at 1.06 when we're looking at community water system arsenic. In MESA, for twofold increase in community water system arsenic, we had a hazard ratio of 1.10, and this was statistically significant. And in a meta-analysis pooling these effect estimates for community water system arsenic across the Strong Heart Family Study and in MESA, we had a hazard ratio of 1.09. We also found that at below current regulatory thresholds, water arsenic exposure was positively associated with diabetes risk. So in MESA, if you're comparing less than or equal to 1 versus greater than 1 microgram per liter of community water system arsenic concentration, we saw a positive association with diabetes risk. Our hazard ratio was 1.34, and it was significant. We saw a similar finding in the Strong Heart Family Study, the hazard ratio of 1.22, even though this was not statistically significant. And we also used categories of private well water arsenic. So we look at less than or equal to 10% of the probability versus greater than 10% of the probability of private well water arsenic. There was a hazard ratio of 1.51 for incident diabetes. So this shows that even at low levels of community water system arsenic in drinking water and at a relatively low probability of elevated private well water arsenic, we do see this increased association with diabetes risk, which does again highlight the importance to reevaluate these maximum contaminant levels and to test private wells. We also found stratifying by body mass index category that water arsenic was positively associated with diabetes risk among participants in the underweight to normal BMI range of a BMI less than 25 kilograms per meter squared. As you can see in both the Strong Heart Family Study and in MESA, for twofold increase in community water system arsenic in MESA, or for twofold increase in private well water arsenic probability of exceeding 10 in the Strong Heart Family Study, we saw a positive association with diabetes risk and statistical interaction by body mass index category. And this does reinforce prior findings that do find increased risk among individuals with lower BMI and not among individuals with higher BMI, as adiposity is such a strong risk factor for diabetes. It may be obscuring an association that we would see among higher BMI individuals. Similarly, for uranium, we found that per twofold increase in community water system uranium, we saw a positive association with diabetes risk among those with a BMI less than 25. And there was, again, significant interaction by body mass index category for community water system uranium. In conclusion, community water system and private well water arsenic levels are positively associated with diabetes risk, particularly among individuals with a BMI less than 25. We found a similar finding in this BMI stratified analysis for community water system uranium, but more research is needed to evaluate health effects between uranium exposures, even at low levels, and diabetes risk. Overall, we found that private well water arsenic was positively associated with community water system arsenic concentrations across the country, the important differences by region and sociodemographic characteristics, highlighting that some communities are continuing to be exposed and we need additional support. Drinking water arsenic and uranium exposures were positively associated with uranium biomarkers, measures of internal dose across diverse study populations in 3 different studies. And we saw that arsenic was positively associated with diabetes risk and that water uranium was positively associated with diabetes risk just among lower BMI individuals. Our findings have important policy implications. For private wells, previous studies have found that policies that require or incentivize private well testing, such as the New Jersey Private Well Testing Act, which requires testing at the point of sale, can help to detect previously unknown elevated exposures, and they can help inform action and address well-documented socioeconomic disparities in private well testing and treatment. Our findings are highlighting that private well users across the country are exposed to levels of arsenic that are associated with exposure and diabetes risk. So encouragement of these policies is supported. And for public water systems, our findings suggest the need to reevaluate the maximum contaminant levels for both arsenic and uranium. Specifically for community water system arsenic, our evidence would suggest that a maximum contaminant level of 1 would be more protective both of exposure and diabetes risk. And for community water system uranium, our evidence would suggest that above 1 microgram per liter in MESA and above 10 micrograms per liter in Strong Heart Family Study, we are seeing this increased association with urinary biomarkers. And I'm just showing this screenshot of a recent news coverage of Dr. Annie Nigra's research group that found that uranium was occurring in half of America's public water systems, and it does highlight the need for increased attention to public water systems specifically and uranium as well. Additionally, we're highlighting the need to reevaluate the maximum contaminant levels. We have found that the final arsenic rule was effective in reducing water arsenic exposures nationwide, particularly with the largest declines occurring among those most highly exposed. So I didn't show this previously, but we evaluated the change in urinary DMA across NHANES survey cycles. So just among participants with the highest, among community water system users with the highest tertile of community water system arsenic concentrations, we did see a decrease in urinary DMA across survey cycles. And we also saw this when we stratified by race and ethnicity, as well as by region. We saw the largest decreases in those most highly exposed, but they do continue to remain highly exposed. So there's a need to target these persistent elevated exposures and to continue funding programs such as from the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Indian Health Service that have really helped achieve the successes we have seen and to help giving support to them to help reduce exposures and persistent disparities. My future directions, I hope to continue conducting exposure assessments of drinking water contaminants in multiple and diverse study populations. I really enjoyed this work and I'm excited to keep doing it. I aim to evaluate associations between drinking water contaminants with cancer and other adverse health risks. I hope to identify and target exposure and health disparities. This is really important to achieving drinking water justice. and to apply these findings to inform public health interventions, policies, regulatory guidance, and risk assessment. I would like to acknowledge everyone who's contributed to this work, my advisors, Annie Niagara and Anna Navasasian, as well as everyone else at the Columbia Superfund Research Program, the individuals of the Metal Lab who made this work possible, everyone at Lamont, at U.S. Geological Survey, throughout the Environmental Health Sciences Department, as well as the Strong Heart Study, the multi-ethnic study of atherosclerosis, National Center for Health Statistics, my thesis committee members, Ben Bostic, Qishuan Chen, Pam Factor Litvak, and Melissa Lombard, as well as my different funding sources. As many people to thank, not all their names are up here, but thank you all. And I'd also like to acknowledge my family members, many of whom are zooming in or in the room. Thank you.
So online, everyone is able to unmute and to use the chat if they need to as well.
I'm happy to take questions. I don't know if there's time. I'm happy to take questions.
It's 15 minutes.
Has a question.
Maya, what kind of is your most exciting idea for like a study you have next, kind of related to water exposure and policy?
There's a lot. I mean, it'd be very exciting to connect different study populations to a variety of different contaminants. This was focusing on metals. I'd be very interested in looking at other inorganic exposures, nitrates, PFAS, additional disinfection byproducts, to really quantify these different exposure disparities. I'd also be very interested in helping use these studies to really inform future risk assessment to help, do the back of the envelope calculations to give the numbers that they can actually plug into policies. I'd be very excited to help do that. Yeah, just to help use this work, a lot of communities remain exposed and they know that they're exposed, but they don't always understand how are these rules being formed. People assume they're safe, they may not actually be safe. We don't want to cause alarm, but we want to really help reduce exposures where we can, to really achieve drinking water justice for other countries. Yes, I'm excited for many different things. I don't know if I answered the question.
So you have someone raising their hand on.
Maya, it was amazing. I was wondering if you could talk about the risk with diabetes and the lower BMI tertile, or do you have some reasoning or why you think that might be the case?
Yeah, so this is consistent with studies that have looked at urinary arsenic biomarkers. So I think it's because body mass index and adiposity are a really important risk factor for diabetes that may be kind of outweighing or obscuring any effect that we would be seeing from arsenic or uranium among higher body mass individuals. So it's not that, and as well as where arsenic and uranium deposit in the body may also be playing a role. Like we know arsenic can deposit in fat, as well as in bone and in other parts of the body. So yeah, maybe the higher body mass index categories where this association is being hidden. But it is important to protect everybody. And we did see, I did look at prevalence, and we did see this significant association even kind of at higher body mass index categories when you look at prevalence at baseline. So I didn't really show the results or dig into them, but yeah, that's why we might be seeing this difference by body mass index categories by the importance of different risk factors.
So I'll second that. Excellent presentation and congratulations on all your work. Can you talk a bit about the mechanism by which uranium might be contributing to type 2 diabetes?
Yeah, so a lot less is known about the potential mechanisms to hypothesize that uranium would operate by a similar mechanism as arsenic, causing beta cell dysfunction and failure. Because the chronic kidney disease is associated with diabetes. So we would suspect that by causing kidney damage, uranium may also be causing diabetes, but whether one is happening before the other or not, it's less well understood. So there really should be more work to understand this effect. We would hypothesize it would be a similar mechanism, but it may also be different. As well as metabolism and distribution of uranium is different. We know that far less uranium is absorbed into the body. So it may also be a limitation of understanding how exposures from drinking water specifically are corresponding to diabetes.
Question. So you focused your comparisons of water arsenic to urinary inorganic arsenic, but the percentage of the relative distribution of inorganic is smaller than the total. I know you mentioned you looked at total arsenic also, but the outcome was attenuated. Why would you think that would be the case? I would think you would intuitively focus on total urine arsenic.
Yeah, so in NHANES we look at DMA and total urine arsenic. In MESA and the Strongheart family study, I looked at the sum of arsenic, so the sum of inorganic and methylated species. I didn't look at total arsenic in MESA and the Strongheart family study, so I could additionally do that. But yeah, that's why we focused more on DMA for NHANES rather than total urine arsenic. And when I looked at DMA, the findings were slightly attenuated in MESA and the Strongheart family study, but relatively similar to inorganic arsenic. We suspect that seafood may be the reason for that attenuated association, but overall our findings were very consistent.
Maya, you have 2 hands raised online.
Maya, thanks for a wonderful presentation on echoing what others have said. What's the intervention for community water systems? So what can communities do?
So communities can do, they can either switch water sources, they can mix water sources from like a low arsenic supply with a high water arsenic supply. They can also implement different treatment technologies. I know that's often more financially cost intensive. So many communities probably could not afford to do that on their own. That does highlight the need for additional support in water system infrastructure across the country. And I guess that if that answers your question. And my mom added a question to the chat. Thoughts on how to motivate the public to address water contamination and disease risk proactively to decrease long-term costs, such as monetary for treatment as well as social. That's a really great point in highlighting the costs of different diseases that are associated with these long-term exposures to arsenic uranium. We can highlight that it is cost-effective to implement these treatment interventions. And for private wells, one of the reasons we did look at both private well and community water system exposures for the Strongheart family study is there were a lot of efforts to really expand the public water lines and bring Strongheart family study participants onto private wells. So maybe the treatment can also motivate expanding public water lines, particularly communities that have high levels of arsenic in the groundwater. So they don't have to do costly use treatment themselves.
Maya, since there are people online, can you show us who's online? I think it would be nice to have a sense of the collective group.
Yes.
And maybe other people like that online may want to ask questions and they can
Yeah, you
show
have
their faces, maybe
people
to say
raising
hi. I think it will be nice. I don't know if you can remove the.
Because Christine, feel free to unfreeze.
It's possible that you have mute set on here.
Yeah, why not? Do you know?
Oh,
Yeah, we need to stop sharing, but we don't need to see this slide. I think it
we
will
need to exit.
Yeah, wonderful. Because now we have a sense that, the amazing group of people there, and we have amazing people who are going to ask questions. So
can you hear us?
wonderful. Yeah, Maya, go.
Can you hear us? You're muted.
Christine, do you want to? Oh, you can unraise. Or
I think, Christine, you are muted. You can unmute.
So I think.
Hi, I can now. It was blocking me. I wasn't able to unmute.
Oh, we
So
cannot hear you.
congratulations, Maya. Are you able to hear me?
I don't think she can hear you yet. 1 second. I don't think she can hear you.
Okay.
and now we can.
Can you hear now, Maya?
Yeah.
Hi, Maya. Congratulations. It's been wonderful to see your journey from being a master's student at Hopkins, taking our environmental and health class, which seems like so many years ago, to seeing you defend your dissertation. Congratulations. And so I think the question I'm going to ask, and I know someone asked it earlier, but in terms of interventions that can be implemented, and also how do you ensure that those interventions are equitable? Because I think that's typically a major challenge. And you have a diverse population, right? You have private well users, people using the municipal water supply. That's my first question. And my second one is, what is your plan to disseminate this wonderful data to the communities that this data has come from?
Yes, I guess in terms of interventions, new treatment, switching or mixing water sources. I think David Harvey's on the call, and our first paper that we looked at, our findings would suggest that Department of Ag and Indian Health Service programs to really help communities reduce their water arsenic exposures have been effective. So continued support of these programs that really target communities and help them to reduce their exposures would really be key to ensuring that these interventions are equitable and effective. And hopefully Biden's infrastructure plan that has announced that EJ is an important water investment will be implemented. So I guess paying attention and making sure that that does happen, and weighing in and supporting this wherever we can. And then in terms of disseminating the research, so hopefully the second part of the piece will be published soon. I had a really great opportunity to attend the Missouri Breaks Research Symposium recently. And that was a really great opportunity for me. I got to speak with local water system administrators and talk about this research. And I know that the Strong Heart Family Study has a number of really robust pathways to communicating our findings in culturally appropriate ways. So helping to disseminate through these pathways and speaking to community members will be interested in contributing and helping to make sure this research goes out to the people who provided this data and who it's most relevant to.
Great question.
Steve was next.
So Steve and Ami have their hands still raised.
Congratulations, great talk. Prior people asked some of the same things I was going to ask about interventions and cost, but I'll ask a slightly different one now. If you look at the community water systems that you've focused on, what fraction of them are just high in arsenic or just high in uranium versus high in both?
So that's a good question. I did not do, but I need to. That's an important thing that I need to look at because they do co-occur across the country. So I can get that number for you. I do know that there are a relatively low percentage of community water systems across the country that are actually in violation of the max contaminant level. I think it's about 1.5% of communities across the country, of community water systems across the country are actually in violation of the max contaminant level, but I'm not sure about uranium. I don't have that number in my mind, so I will check this and
especially as you are recommending much lower MCLs, it'd be interesting to look at that at various thresholds.
Definitely, that's a really great point.
And you know, MCLs are not just set based on health; they're set on a mixture of health and cost. So, I encourage you to work with people to look at the cost side of things too.
Definitely.
But great job, well done.
Okay, I'll go next. Maya, such impressive science. Congratulations. And you also just did such a nice job succinctly summarizing all of this work. I think one thing that excites me is, you know, the science has so much policy relevance, and that there were components of that where you explicitly tried to kind of frame your scientific questions and do sub-analyses that are relevant to policy. And also kudos to working with restricted and Haines data as someone who has done that and has a whole bunch of trainees attempting to do that. I think what Annie said is people really can't appreciate how many barriers you have to go through. But my question is, how would you, and I don't know if you have presented your research to, let's say, like the EPA, or if you're planning to, but how would you, one, succinctly very succinctly summarize kind of the take-home messages of all of this research for, let's say, the EPA. And what specifically to them, what would either be your policy recommendations to them or suggestions of how they should utilize your work?
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. I'm very interested in science policy, so to have advisors that really encourage me to help develop policy relevant questions was really exciting for me. In terms of a policy recommendation, I think the evidence across studies supports 1 microgram per liter for arsenic, but for uranium 10 micrograms per liter. But it should really be repeated probably in additional studies, specifically for uranium, because there's less evidence there. I do know that the US EPA had been considering more health protective maximum contaminant levels originally. So this evidence would support a return to consideration of these more health protective and lower maximum contaminant levels, especially as methods of detection, quantification, and treatment have improved. And in consideration of the costs, one way to present to the EPA would be to estimate the cost of the health effects that we are estimating to be associated. Previous studies have also estimated the number of cases of cancer and other types of disease that we avoid through reductions in maximum contaminant levels. So presenting this data to them and the cost burden, I think would be a way to present to the EPA. I have experience submitting data to dockets for US EPA considerations, but I would be very excited to do additional work presenting data.
Take David Harvey's question. I think it will be great. And then I saw also Sultan Sabo, who is from USGS, had a question in the chat. I think if you could take those two, that would be great. And then I can.
Hey, Maya, congratulations making it through. I think I started my DRPH program at the same time as you did, and I'm like still twirling along here in it. So congratulations for making it all the way through as quickly as you have and with the great results. And I just, I work at the Indian Health Service, and so the question came, if you're presenting things to EPA, well, you're already presenting to the Indian Health Service, getting right here. I think as far as the uranium, I'd be interested in hearing like what you think would be needed for more collection of uranium data and kind of what would that look like at the Indian Health Service. And then I'll just also state, when we look at drinking water compliance data from CIDWIS, there's a great proportion of the data that's just not reported. And then so making that clear, especially in Native American communities, the monitoring and reporting violation rates are extremely high and impact a large percentage of the population. So there's lots of uncertainty around that. And so, the associations you have with the private wells is kind of an important kind of a piece of that as well. So, but great work, and look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you. That's a really great point. The need for increased uranium monitoring, particularly in American Indian communities. That was a big limitation. That was actually quite a limitation actually of our private well water uranium findings. They're often much attenuated and limited due to this sparse data. There's also a lot of uranium and community water systems across the country that we don't have data for. So it's a really great point to increase uranium monitoring in American Indian communities and across the country, across water source. And then ideas on how to focus media and water resources community on the high risk from arsenic, which seems to have diminished in emphasis. That's a great point. Yeah, I think highlighting that communities, even at relatively low levels of exposure below regulatory limits, are being exposed at levels that we are seeing reflected in urine. And then to get the community interested, connecting them to health endpoints, particularly for diseases such as diabetes, which affects so much of the US population, as well as another number of studies on heart disease, and really focusing on how these exposures connect. And it wouldn't require a behavior or lifestyle change to really affect the population level. I think that was a priority. I think I got all the questions, but any other questions?
Amazing. And congratulations. I need to tell everybody about the next steps.
Yeah, so now we'll have the closed door examination in here with the committee. And then at 2 p.m., we'll all come back for a celebration. So you're all invited back here to celebrate Maya.
There will be food, drinks, and everything. Come on.